Hello and welcome to the next edition of One-to-One in 20 with Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce and key business leaders from across the region. My name is Paul Britton, I'm Chief Executive for the Chamber, and it's my pleasure to introduce this session with Ashley Wheaton, who's Principal for UCEM, or the University College of Estate Management as it used to be known. Ashley shares his candid views on how government has supported the education sector during COVID-19 and also draws upon his experience in the technology sector, as the UCEM is one of the leading providers of digital education in the UK.
Okay, so hello Ashley, very good to see you again.
You too, Paul.
Let's start this conversation with a reflection, my reflection on your centenary that I joined last year for the College of Estate Management in Greenwich. Seems some time ago now. And the thing that struck me was one of the things you shared around how the College of Estate Management was born out of another crisis, very different crisis, but one where you were, as a college, very much helping to support the nation and those further afield as well through in another way, sharing learning, sharing experience. So perhaps you could share some reflections on that as well, Ashley.
Yeah, no, very happy to, Paul. I mean, it's just over a year ago. In fact, it was 16th of May last year, that event that was the flagship in our centenary years. I mean, I think the first thing I have to reflect on is, weren't we lucky that we were able to complete and celebrate our centenary year last year without being interrupted as we would have been this year? So, it is quite extraordinary to me. That
it's hard to imagine running events in the same way that you did there, drawing people across the whole of the UK.
Yeah, would have been really difficult. So I feel fortunate in that regard. You're right, by the way. I mean, the College of Estate Management, as it was then, was formed on the basis of, the need to build homes fit for heroes, after the First World War. And so, our genesis is from, crisis, and we sort of find ourselves right in the thick of it again here and now. And in fact, one of the things I was doing this morning was participating in a new advisory committee with a series of sort of meetings amongst a community of vice chancellors looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the entirety of the higher education sector. And interestingly, I feel like as an institution, we're better placed than all of them. The model that we've developed and been so keen on over the last 100 years, in fact, because our model has always been about flexible and distance-based learning. But now that we've adapted that for the modern world, and here we are with a sort of fully fledged online offering, it feels like actually we're really well poised to fare quite well actually through this particular crisis. But it is interesting to me, as it is to you, that here we are 100 years on, and we still can't quite find stability and firm ground.
What I mean, that's really interesting. So that session you're having with colleagues and counterparts from the sector. I mean, what words of encouragement or advice were you sharing for your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean, we're having, I think, a really mature sort of conversation. I think that's one of the joys actually of working in higher education. We really know how to collaborate. We compete with each other as well, but I think the whole sector is very well versed in helping each other and playing its part in higher education in its entirety, not just the benefit of their own institution. And I think what I certainly discovered is that every single university that was represented there has responded brilliantly. None of them are complacent. None of them have sat back and done nothing. They've all responded quite differently, actually, which is, I suppose, in itself interesting. But they've all had to be really agile and think really quickly, as all businesses have done. But let's face it, higher education is not necessarily known for that, is it? So, I think it's been a good effort all round to help students, either those that are returning or should have been returning this year, and thinking through those that may wish to, start their journey at university in the autumn, and thinking through the best way to accomplish that. Frankly, in the face of some not particularly commendable support from government. I mean, I think that the Department for Education and the Office of Students have been a little bit absent in the conversation. DfE have naturally, I suppose, had their arms full of, what to do about, primary and secondary education. I think that's reasonable, but we've had to do a lot of it on our own, I think.
Well, what could they have done better in hindsight? Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But what would you have liked to have seen as a sector or personally?
Well, I think it's quite straightforward for me, actually, Paul, and I've even asked the Office for Students this very question. I think it was about engaging more with the student community, because I think they're the ones that know the answers, or at least they're the ones that would have a sense of what would look right for them. And I think too much of this in some ways has been driven from the centre, and more engagement if they want to sort of commoditize or marketise, the higher education sector. You have to think about students as customers, and if you want to do that, then you probably should ask them what would make them comfortable, happy, feel safe in returning to university, in the fullness of time. So if I were to ask one thing, I'd say, why don't they engage a little bit more with with the student community? But like I say, hindsight's wonderful.
And how are you finding the student community is responding? And I mean that both in terms of what you can describe as traditional kind of local cohort, but also internationally as well. Are you starting to see different trends that maybe perhaps do relate to what we're going through in the lockdown at the moment? So very interested in that.
Yeah, it is a mixed picture, and we're fortunate in that our business model is by its nature highly resilient to this situation. So our student experience has been entirely preserved. So students that continue to study with us have an uninterrupted service. The only thing we've had to change is some examination methodologies, and we've adapted those really quickly. So in terms of the student community, it's been absolutely business as usual. The difficult thing is the students who are working with employers, of which there are many, and the situation that relates to their employment. So I think at the last count we had 166 of our apprentices, so that's about 10%, who'd been furloughed. So in that scenario, we're trying to find and accommodate methodologies that will help those apprentices to continue their studies whilst they are actively excluded from being in the workplace, which of course is slightly more challenging because a lot of their learning is designed to be on the job. Elsewhere in the world, interestingly in Hong Kong, we're actually seeing some really good signs of a very rapid recovery. Hong Kong, of course, has been, affected not just by COVID-19, but by the political crisis, well before that. And there, the early signs are that we're getting many more applications for the semester starting in the autumn than we would normally expect at this time. So I think where students have a choice to find, a program that is by design online, I'm imagining that we will see a bit more of that than those who are choosing to take up a place at a face-to-face institution who happens to be offering, a hybrid version or an online version, whilst they're waiting to return to normal, so to speak.
And what is that? Are we going to see a normal for the real estate sector? I've been reading so much on these conversations that I'm having about what that new norm might look like. And you've got some real champions for the real estate and construction sector within both your leadership structure there, but also of course within the student community as well. So early thoughts on what we might be seeing post-COVID.
Yeah, I wish I could answer this question with some, certainty or authority. It genuinely, it's very early days, isn't it, and hard to tell. We're definitely hearing from our employers that are sponsoring students that, they are not expecting things to be great. That's the headline news, I think, from the sector. The return to work for construction, is slow. And transactions in the real estate sector are virtually at a standstill, and they have been for some time, whether it's commercial or residential. So, it's going to have to re-emerge at some pace, I think, to return back to levels that we were used to before this crisis. But I do think that there's quite a lot of optimism. Employers that we're talking to they're not full of sort of doom and gloom. I think that the sector is faced with a lot less challenges to overcome than hospitality, for example, which feels like it will be sort of, challenged for some time to come. I think once real estate and construction return to something that resembles normal, it won't be that different to what we had before, because their industries, I think, can operate that way.
You mentioned agility earlier on. That's a phrase that I hear a lot. And another one was around, perhaps for occupiers as well, just looking at how they reimagine, I think was what I expressed. How do you better use the space? How do you better change the experience of the use of space that you have?
Yeah.
But I've had a very mixed reaction from the members and businesses across the Thames Valley that I've been talking to around the prospect of longer term working from home. And I can't put my finger on whether that's by sector, by size of company, by demographic. So I agree with you. It is very much early days to see how this is borne out. I think one of the more frequently talked about trends that we could be looking at is perhaps the impact of COVID-19 on London, perhaps in terms of encouraging folks to move out to the leafy suburbs or moving their offices out this way. But perhaps that will be part of the agility that the Thames Valley will be regarded for.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, Paul, there are lots of challenges within this, by the way. I mean, there have been lots of businesses that have been very quick to jump on the bandwagon of saying, well, we've all got used to working from home. You know, it works so well for us. We can just do a lot more of that. And so they're probably eyeing up their real estate portfolios going, oh, maybe we don't need as much. You know, so I suppose you could see suppression in the real estate market, you know, in commercial for sure, in office space, because businesses probably will emerge from this feeling like they don't need as much of it. I'm not so sure about that. I don't think anything's really known yet about the sort of the human impact of this and people's long-term, you know, mental health from working from home for this length of time. You know, I certainly know we've got members of staff who really need to be back in the building for their own sakes, not just for, you know, UCM's sake. So I think that's one important dimension. And then I suppose the other conundrum that we have to resolve to get this right is the issue of public transport. You know, until we really believe that large-scale transportation of people, you know, around the southeast, either to or from Berkshire for that matter, you know, is genuinely safe and genuinely possible, it feels like there'll only ever be a proportion of the working population that can actually get to, you know, their place of work. And central London, it has to be the sort of hardest hit in that regard, doesn't it? But just because of the proportion of people who commute on public transport. You know, we've certainly said to our staff that we hope we'll be back in the building, probably about 40 to 50 of them out of 250 in July. You know, you have to commit that you are coming by, you know, an isolated mode of transport. So if you can commute by car or bicycle, that's fine. But if you have to come by public transport, you have to stay at home. And until that problem gets solved, you know, you can still see a lot of very sparsely populated office buildings, can't you?
Yeah. And your HQ is based in Reading. There, you know, walking distance from the train station, and yet one of the patterns of behaviour that we've seen is we've probably got equal numbers of commuters travelling out of Reading into London as you have from London out, and we perhaps are going to start to see a bit of a recalibration in around that as people look to reduce the amount of commuting that they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I could see working patterns being evolved. I mean, I could see a situation where our staff don't work in the office as much, but I can't see a wholesale shift to continuing to work from home. I certainly couldn't do that.
Well, you mentioned earlier, and we shouldn't, we don't play this for the impact upon staff, either through a productivity point of view or through a mental health point of view. I've heard this time and time again.
Yeah.
And in fairness to you, to you and your colleagues, I know my team at the Chamber have been working with members of your HR team as well, and the work that you are doing to support not just your own staff, but also the students that you have. Yeah. And are you finding that the demands placed upon you as an educator are also being shaped by what's been happening? Has your curriculum changed in any respect to that, or perhaps just topped and tailed in some way?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually, there's a lot in that question. I mean, first of all, we are doing a lot more in terms of, you know, mental health support for both our staff and our students. You know, I could tell you now that the average support call into our student services team that is not about education or about the subject matter, so all of the other stuff, they've pretty much doubled in time. So the students that are looking for support are looking for a lot more of it, and I think that's probably quite understandable. Our reasonably small but well-skilled, mental health team are doing a lot more. Their caseload, if you like, is much, much higher than it was. So there's definitely evidence that more support is required. What we're trying to do with our curriculum is actually adapt it to the situation more than change the subject area. Mm-hmm. So we've put in place already about 6 different interpretations of what we do. It's one of the beauties of having a model which is wholly online and flexible by nature. So we've put in place, for example, a 1-year postgraduate program, whereas typically that would be 2 years part-time, because we are imagining that there will be a large number of people who find themselves either made redundant or find themselves not working at least. And so actually we think the opportunity is to find people who want to make that career leap, but make it earlier, make it faster. So accelerated versions of our product offer is one thing we'll be doing. And we're also putting in a lot more access programs. So for the first time ever, we've evolved or developed rather an access program for postgraduates. So typically, that isn't open to all entrants. You have to come with certain prerequisites, and if you didn't have them, previously you couldn't enroll on a master's program with us. Now we've said if you want to do that, you can come and study a single module with us, for 6 months. Assuming that goes well, then you can come onto that program. So I think it's allowed us a little bit of time and space to think about what sort of adaptations do we want of our core offer for a market where the consumer or the students that want to come on our programs will look and feel quite different, I think, because of individual situations or the situation within industry that will probably make them want different things from us. And of course, they'll still be able to get, the same stuff they used to, but it's more about adaptations against the existing curriculum rather than developing or thinking about brand new subject areas.
So as a provider, you're doing your bit to try and stay flexible and provide some agility within, or some flexibility, as I say, within what you're looking to deliver. What would you want to see from government over the next few months around supporting providers such as yourselves in that? The data is all pointing to really challenging times. We know that.
Yeah.
The first, and this goes again back to what we were talking about before, about providing a sense of purpose through training and a sense of fulfillment around that. So government surely has got a role to play in either supporting that to happen, or either directly through the working population or through educators such as yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that you know me well enough by now that I probably don't necessarily have a brilliant and positive opinion about what's happened so far. I think a lot more could be done. I think unfortunately in the rush to sort of decide what was right for the schools sector, the sort of further education and university sector got rather left to its own devices. You probably saw this, but it's reasonably public knowledge that our local, the other university in Reading, right, University of Reading, I think they will have £100 million hole in their finances over the next 3 years. These are some really big numbers, and across the whole of the sector, in fact, the numbers of staff being furloughed and likely being made redundant, are very substantial. There was some interesting research published a couple of weeks ago that suggested that, in fact, education was likely to be the hardest hit sector after COVID-19. It just hasn't happened yet. I just think there's a bit of latency in this, because it won't really have its full impact until the autumn, when we get a sense of how many students really want to begin or continue their studies across the whole of tertiary education. No, everyone's guessing right now. We know that the international student numbers will be hugely impacted. It's highly unlikely international students will be allowed to come here. So they have to make some difficult decisions, don't they, about whether they want to begin their studies in some sort of online model or whether they just want to defer for a year. So I think there's a lot of unknowns. Where I think we might have seen more engagement and involvement from government is supporting institutions financially. What we've seen instead is a rather, I suppose, perfunctory attempt to sort of say, well, you can all just plug into the existing programs. So all universities have been told that they're just as eligible for a coronavirus business interruption loan as everybody else is. But nothing specific has been done for educators or, the university sector, other than a few sort of bits of tweaking around the edges. So I feel like there is more to come. And I know that there are, a significant number of small universities who are already and certainly will find themselves in very difficult financial situations. You're probably aware that the Department for Education imposed a cap on universities, the one that they removed about 6 years ago. So, they've already put controls in place to attempt to sort of level the playing field and not have universities over enroll or over recruit. But that in itself feels like a rather blunt instrument, when actually this should really be about student choice now, and saying which university do I think is going to provide me with the best opportunity in this situation, rather than a return to sort of a government enforced or regulated environment. And just a bit wider than that, by the way, one other thing that I think is a little bit absent from government, not just for the education sector, but more holistically, is I think they could have done a bit more work with representative bodies, yourselves included, but where is the consultation, for example, with the British Council for Offices or the Institute for Workplace and Facilities Management, in saying, how can you help us to help businesses return safely to work? I do feel there's a lot of centralised government advice and a lot left to interpretation by individual businesses, and there's not much in between. I actually feel like I would happily have my building certified by an inspector from, one of those organisations or elsewhere that says we are signing you off as COVID ready, or whatever the right phrase was, and give not just me but my staff some real sense of certainty. So I think there's been a bit of a miss between industry and those that represent certain industries and government's engagement. And maybe it's been happening, behind closed doors. I'm not aware of it, but.
Well, let's just, it's not too much of a leap of imagination then to assume that perhaps a good deal of the recovery is going to come down to businesses and businesses working together as a community. So you mentioned that the experience of work and apprenticeships is one challenge. I mean, are there others as well that you can see on the horizon, and where businesses working with organisations like us, like the Chamber, we can make a difference in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need confidence, don't we? I think that's the key, and in some cases it's returned, hasn't it? And I suppose my honest belief is that some of what's been done over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's probably been done for lots of very good reasons that I don't understand, by the way, but it all feels like it's a bit back to front. The efforts to regenerate what we all know is going to be critical, which is a functioning economy that, begins to pull itself out of this deep, recession that it's going to find itself in. That seems to still be left too much to everyone's sort of, individual judgment as businesses. I think officially we're still being told don't return to your offices. And yet, as I said to you earlier on, if I've got a productivity gap in my business of probably 40% from where we were pre-lockdown to where we are now, I need to close that really quickly. So I need support and help from, the local business community as well as the national business community to give me the confidence that when I make that decision, people won't look at me like, it wasn't the right decision. It seems a bit sort of odd, doesn't it? I've been watching the pictures this morning of thousands of people queuing up to get into Primark, like that's the thing that we've all been waiting for. And I do appreciate, by the way, that retail, needs a lot of help to recover really quickly. But I suppose I just feel like the office sector's been sort of left till last, with everybody assuming that it's okay, for all those people to continue working the way they are.
Well, I think with having worked with CEM for a good number of years now, and with the work that you have done, the investment you have made over the years in this platform and the experience you brought into the business, I think that does show that it is possible to continue to be successful. It's possible to continue to to grow. Probably the final comment from you, Ashley, is around what experience you've brought into college and also into your sector from your previous roles. So with Microsoft and also with the other talent software business that you were involved in, Infobasis.
Yeah.
So what's the learning you took from that? And because these are organisations, I mean, Microsoft classically, in terms of agility, they've had to reinvent themselves time and time again. And there must be some learning you've pulled across from that into CEM.
Yeah, no, definitely. By the way, and I suppose there are 2 or 3 themes, aren't there? The first one is about being committed and sort of robust in your decision making. I mean, I definitely learned that through my time at Microsoft. You know, there wasn't much dilly-dallying. You know, there's a bit of discussion, make those decisions, and then execute, and that's really important, isn't it? You know, I could see a lot of businesses, you know, under this situation, spending a lot of time trying to navigate to the right answer. In fact, the right answer was probably there all along, and I just think you have to work quickly, you know, diligently, but quickly to make the right decision so you can move on from them. If you spend a lot of time in debate, I'm not sure that's really helpful. Then I think it's a question of looking at the 2 halves of the equation. You know, it's easy, isn't it, to get sucked into, you know, looking at cost reductions and looking at income forecasts and looking at how to sort of run either a reduced size or a diminishing business. I think it's a great opportunity, isn't it, to start to look much wider than that, and not just how to manage the situation, but what opportunities are presenting themselves to you as a result of the situation. And I think we've been very fortunate there. I think we've been well positioned to say, okay, well, there are some new things that we could be doing, and we're in a great position to be able to do them. So I think being a bit opportunistic and entrepreneurial is not a bad thing at this moment.
I'm 100% with you, and I know that there are a good number of our businesses across the community, many of which are facing real challenging times at the moment. And I think that, as you said, it's very easy to get into a situation where you're unable to see what the solutions are. But as a region, as a region which is on the doorstep of the capital, which has got a long history of innovation and has wonderful diversity, I think our challenge as a chamber in working with you and other key businesses across the region is to keep that confidence and to, acknowledge the challenges and the real difficulties that many businesses are facing. But we can be opportunists, and we can be successful from this. And I don't think that's going to be at any loss to the rest of the UK.
No.
In fact, it could be, and it should be, contributing to the rebalancing of the economy. That's something that you've heard and others have heard me talk about before. So I think having examples such as a CM where it is working, and it is because of early investment, and it is because of the ability to be agile, will help us as a region to continue to prosper and grow. I believe we will have to change. We will have to adapt. We know that.
Yes.
And we haven't talked about, the challenges around climate change, for example, which I know the college are also very much involved in. But there are already green shoots that, this is the first interview that I think I can talk about kind of green shoots of recovery.
Yeah.
For many that might seem too early, but that as a membership organisation, as an organisation responsible for helping companies to trade internationally, that is what we are starting to see. So.
Yeah, I think that the secret here is you don't have to reinvent yourself, but a bit of evolution is probably just what's required right now. I think if you stick with just trying to do what you've always done, that might be difficult, but just broaden your field of vision a little bit. Have a look at the things that are slightly on the edge of what you were doing, and maybe that's where you'll find some of the answers.
Ashley, thank you again for your time. I wish you and your colleagues all the best, and for your safe and deliberate move back into the office as and when it comes. Okay.
Great.
Look after yourself and your team. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you.